There is one more kind of stacked speaker system called a line array. I have no experience working with one of these, but we're going to have a guest speaker in about a week who actually sets these up. So they look like this. How many of you have seen this at a concert? Yeah. That's a huge difference between this and that is that this one bends. Any idea why does this like J shape to it? They're not that different from one of these speakers turned on their side. They're a little bit more elaborate electronically, but physically it's pretty much the same thing as a speaker turned on its side. When you stack them up, they're not all that different from the idea that's going on over here, right? They do constructive interference horizontally and then destructive interference up and down, but they're also directional. Where you are perpendicular to the speaker, you're going to get the most out of that one particular speaker. If you've got this in front of a, let's say, a football stadium, there's going to be some people that's going to be really far away, and you want your speaker to be practically shooting out horizontal audio. And there's going to be some people who are really close to the speaker, and you want to be able to reach them as well. So it bends down, and it points it downwards at them. So the closer you are to the stage, the more you're hearing of the speakers at the bottom. The further you are from the stage, the more you're hearing the speakers on the top. And of course, the ones on the top are pulling out a lot more power because they're trying to reach people who are further away. But the end goal, hopefully, is that no matter where you are, how close or how far away from the speaker you are, you're getting roughly the same level of volume. Now you do get all kinds of like constructive and destructive interference, but these also tend to be one of the like most expensive R&D type of speaker. So they're taking all that into account. Almost all of these speakers have custom physics modeling software to be able to sort of figure out where are the hotspots of the different frequencies throughout the entire space, to be able to cover the audio that you want, but also to prevent audio from going where you don't want it. Imagine if you're doing a big outdoor festival with 3 stages. You don't want the audio from one stage to bleed into the audience of another stage, right? So that's where all of the software comes in, and they have the specs of each one of these speakers modeled out pretty well. If you can tell it how high it's going to be and which direction it's going to point. Or you can just punch your parameters into the software, and it will tell you what angle you need to be directing each one of these speakers, or what kind of speaker that you need to be able to get the coverage that you want. We have subwoofers on the ground, partly because they're incredibly heavy and you don't want them falling on anybody. And then you have all your high-frequency stuff hoisted up high in the sky so that people unblock the sound, right? Subwoofers lived quite nicely on the floor, not just for weight reasons, but because the wavelengths of bass frequencies are long enough that they can work themselves around people pretty easily. So a human being standing in front of a subwoofer doesn't block so much of the bass. Is there any change? Bass frequencies work themselves around human-sized obstacles really, really, really well. You can still obstruct them with things like concrete walls, for instance, mountains, definitely. But you don't really have that line of sight issue that you will have with high frequencies and mid frequencies. And even some mid frequencies already starts to become less of a problem. Okay, quick 5-minute primer on microphones. People know about feedback, right? Where the sound coming out of the speaker goes back into the microphone, comes out of the speaker, goes back in the microphone, and it just gets louder and louder. So you want to avoid that. And really, the only way that you can avoid that is, one, don't point your microphone directly at the speaker. And when it does happen, don't cover your microphone. This actually doesn't help. This actually creates a little cone. And you know what happens when sound goes through cones? It gets amplified. What you want to do is you want to move it, where you get a little bit of that interference in. So let me see if I can demonstrate that. 1, 2. You got a bit? Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Okay. So when I just move it a little bit, it really does disrupt the buildup of their frequencies. But it starts to build again, right? So the other thing that you do is you try to figure out where that feedback is coming in, and you just turn your volume down during setup. And make sure that you never turn it up past that point, and then turn off the microphone when you're not using it. Don't stand right in front of the speaker. I've got the microphone turned off right now because it's much easier for it to feedback when you're doing that. And secondly, if there is feedback and it starts to build up, let's see whether if I can just make it feedback by getting closer. Just move it a little bit, right? And that's how you kill feedback. If all you have is the microphone and you don't have control over the volume, just get out of there. Just move a little bit in some direction. You're hearing a lot of handling noise. So I've got a slightly cheaper microphone called the SM48. But a lot of microphones like this, they have a little high-pass filter built in so that you get less of that rumble. On certain mixers, you've got also a tone control, so I can just tell it to sort of ignore that handling noise. This is what happens if you just amplify the bass. This is what happens when you just amplify the treble. So you might want to be able to adjust that as well so that you get less handling noise. For dealing with feedback, don't do this. And don't hold the microphone like this when you're just talking either. I don't know if you can hear the difference in my voice when I'm doing this and when I'm doing this. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. It does get louder, again, because I'm basically making a little cone, right? But it's also kind of distorting my voice in a way that, one, makes it much easier to feedback, and two, doesn't sound great. Unless you're going for some sort of like musical effect, I guess. You know, you're trying to be Damon Albarn from the Gorillaz, and he does this a lot to create a sort of a megaphone effect. This is a dynamic microphone, which means it needs amplification, but the microphone itself doesn't need any power to operate. All the amplifier is doing is taking the tiny little voltage differences that are being created from the vibrations in the microphone and just trying to make them louder. Not actually all that different from a turntable. There are several other kinds of microphones that you will find being sold out of retailers that are less useful for DJs. Condenser microphones, they require electrical voltage to operate. Basically, what they do is they electrify part of the microphone, and then they're measuring the electrostatic charge. They create a charge, and they're measuring how that fluctuates as whatever vibrating diaphragm in the microphone is producing. Those don't work unless you can actually provide it power, and that's called phantom power. It's actually pretty high. It's like 48 volts, but it's very, very low current. That is a thing that you will run into pretty often as a music producer, but you don't really want those so much for DJs. One advantage is that dynamic microphones, because they don't require power and the architecture is pretty inefficient, it's actually really bad at picking sound from far away. Say something from where you are.
I really like the spring.
Okay. Nothing.
I really like the spring that you can use.
Yeah, see? So it is really bad at picking up the noise around the room and really, really good for getting the voice right in front of it, right? This, in fact, is called a cardioid mic. So it's very good at getting sounds directly where it's pointed, kind of mediocre for getting sounds that are coming on sight, and really bad at getting sound from the back. If you were to draw a shape of it, it looks like a heart, where all the sensitivity is in front and none of the sensitivities are the back. So this may feedback. This will not feedback. So that's another tip for avoiding feedback is keep the back of your mic pointed towards the closest speaker to you. If you've got monitor speakers and it's actually amplifying the sound of your voice, make sure the back of your mic is pointed at your monitor speaker. You'll be able to reduce the occurrence of feedback. There are other versions of mics. There are ribbon microphones that will in fact fry if you put phantom power through them. And there are some DJ mixers that now actually support condenser microphones. Those are mostly targeted at people who are doing live streaming, for instance, at home. But for the most part, if you are interested in using microphones as a DJ, you're probably going for a dynamic microphone, kind of like this. Make sure that it's close to you. Don't hold it like this, because like I said, it's very insensitive to picking up your voice. This is terrible. This is good. This is not good. You know, if you go to a wedding and your uncle is giving the toast and just holding the mic like this, you know, just Give them a hand gesture. Bring it up, bring it up. The DJ will thank you. All right? Point it right at your mouth. And something for you to remember if you ever have to give a toast at somebody else's wedding. Yep.
In the higher-end Pioneer equipment, I noticed they have like a feedback reducer for
Yes.
mics. How does that affect the quality of the, or does it affect it?
So it is literally removing a frequency. It's sort of detecting when a single frequency is getting too loud, and then it basically does an equalization to cut that frequency out. It's distorting your sound, but it's far better than hearing feedback. So, but it's not foolproof. It has a limit on how much feedback it can possibly remove. That's why they call it a feedback reducer and not a feedback remover.